Content warning. Attempted sexual assault and suicide is mentioned in this episode.
Hey, I've lost the script, so give me just 20 seconds to find the script.
You literally had so much time!
It's fine. It's fine.
This is why we should just
it's
riff.
fine.
This
Don't
is
worry
why
about
we
it.
should just riff everything constantly.
No! This is exactly why we
Yes!
shouldn't riff everything constantly.
No, you don't understand. This is exactly why you riff everything constantly. It's perfect.
Oh, it's terrifying. Oh, it's terrifying.
You just don't get it. You just don't get it. But it's perfect.
Oh, man. That's what a nightmare. Us riffing constantly. What would that be? What would that be? We've done that. I've been editing what us riffing constantly looks like. It's a horrifying nightmare that goes on for far too long with a million tangents.
Listen. But like, it's so much fun. It's so much fun.
Yeah, but it's a nightmare to edit.
It's a nightmare
Anyway.
to edit, but it's so much fun.
I'm Noah.
And I'm Taylor.
And Taylor, Tiger Eyes 45. You didn't catch Pom Poko?
No, I'm not so surprised that I didn't now after seeing it.
You didn't catch the classic 1994 Studio Ghibli animated movie, Pom Poko? Oh boy, it's a classic. It's one of my favorites. I'm so glad that we're talking about this. I'm glad that I was able to edge this into being one of our first ones, because this is, for the record, the first Ghibli movie I ever bought and the only one that I personally own. I'm quite proud of that fact, because again, this is probably my favorite Ghibli movie. I love it just a whole heaps and bunches. Oh man,
Mine
it was a
was
fun
Ponyo.
time. I bet you had a fun time, Taylor.
You watched me watch it. You know what kind of time I had. It was alright. It wasn't. We'll get into it.
One of these days, we're gonna talk about something that I'm presenting, and you're gonna like it as much as me. And it's gonna be a bright and happy day that day. I thought you had freakish taste like me. I was grossly wrong.
I have some odd taste, but they're tastes and oddities that are not yours. Your oddities are different from my oddities, and we're just gonna have to live with that. That's why we're doing this.
We're just gonna live with that. I guess we'll survive. Okay, for those of you who don't know, and why would you know, frankly, Pom Poko, also known as Heisei Tanuki Gassen Pon Poko, or literally Heisei Era Raccoon Dog War Pon Poko,
Okay.
is an animated movie about a bit of an eco-terrorism. Just a bit, just a smidge. When, latter half of 20th century Japanese development around Tokyo starts reducing the natural habitat of the local Tanuki population over the course of several decades. It eventually drives these raccoons that are the stars of this movie, again, Pom Poko, to rally together in the early 90s and form an offensive front against the human encroachment on their territory, and to stop the development of the new Tama Hills town in the forest where they currently reside. The movie itself is fabulous. The framing device is that this is all a war documentary, or at least that's how it's presented to us. So, like, for the first 5 minutes, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this is some sort of absurdist Ken Burns documentary. That's just how it's framed. It is high stylism. It's very, very thrilling. Obviously, the raccoon dogs, the Tanukis, they ultimately fail in their efforts, and they have to figure out how to come to grips with life in a world that has been dramatically destroyed by humans. And frankly, don't we all have to come to learn how to live with that?
I mean,
I just love this movie
I
so much,
mean,
Taylor. I
as
just love it
long-
so much.
as long as I'm trapped here, I have to come to learn with that. As long as I'm trapped here. Apparently, not everybody thinks I'm human, so maybe that's why I didn't like this movie as much as you.
Oh my gosh, you're secretly not human. Maybe that's why you don't like it. You're like all the Tanukis at the end that could transform. You are actually a secret Tanuki. Or
Oh,
maybe you're actually a secret Kitsune. That's why you hate this movie, because the Kitsunes get done so darn badly.
okay. First off, the Kisunes get done badly in almost everything they are, unless they're completely like seen as heroes instead of like actual tricksters like they're supposed to be. So, I'm not surprised by how the Kisunes are done in this movie. It's not anything new. But,
So what oh?
but, there are many reasons not to enjoy this movie, even if one is not, even if one is part of the human species.
Oh. Well, let's just get into it then. Let's hack down into it. I've given the context that I love so dearly. Now, as the newbie, as the one who's been brought into this nightmarish world, which I love, by the way, just think about how you're killing my darlings every time you open your mouth to critique this beautiful movie. I just want you to keep that in mind. It's my heart. It doesn't matter. Puncture it away. Go to town. Let's do this.
That's gonna make it so much more fun. Thank you for that. Okay.
Oh, man.
Shall we talk about just the abhorrent representation of women in this movie right off the bat, or shall we begin with the animation and how that's an actual good thing? We can start with a positive note. I really thought the animation was done beautifully. I really like the style in which it was drawn in. Right off the bat. So, the art is done beautifully. It's not done in a style that makes me think, oh yeah, this is obviously Studio Ghibli. But it is beautiful nonetheless. And it reminds me of a lot of like old 2D animation movies that came out before I was born. Like, I'm trying to think of an example of one. It's cleaner than like SWAT Cats used to be. And SWAT Cats had like an hour-long special movie. But this one looked cleaner than that, but it still has like the same slightly, I don't know. I'm not an artist. I don't have the right like vocabulary for this. But it's just the way it looks. That's what I'm trying to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about it well. But that was gorgeous and I enjoyed it. And I love how all the trees and plants looked. And like when they're just in the forest, just chilling in the forest, it's my favorite parts because I'd rather just watch the background scenery all day than, you know, the Tanukis attacking people with their magic balls.
I mean, you can't blame them for that. That's just the folklore. That's just the folklore. I
Yeah,
mean, you know,
I'm not
a Tanuki would.
I'm not blaming the characters. I'm just saying, would rather watch the forest.
It is lovely. I have to agree. I mean, and it pairs so lovely with the score that they use. It's this sort of jazz piano sort of
Yes.
thing that Ghibli does love to do. It's very, it's just beautiful. It captures this fabulous sense of this sort of rural, natural majesty, and the long montages of the Tanukis in their least stylized form as like a fun like expression of how they shapeshift. The Tanukis in this movie will appear in one of three different forms, and you can't
Yes.
read any article about this movie without somebody pausing to explain that concept because it is just so cool. There'll be the form that is that you'll see the most in these like extended nature montage moments where the Tanukis are wandering around looking like actual real world Japanese raccoon dogs. Like it's very naturalistic. They are behaving and running around as if they were the actual creature. And then there's sort of the standard in between form where they're all very anthropomorphized, walking around on their hind legs. Some of them have clothes on. They're all talking in like English or Japanese, if depending on if you're a coward and are doing the sub or the dub. We're cowards, so we went with the dub. Actually,
Okay.
I'm the coward. I had control over that.
I was about to say, I didn't have an option. Don't be dragging me into this.
We were both cowards, I think, frankly. I think we're both cowards. You could have stopped me. You could have said anything at any time.
I said something at the beginning. I didn't mind it.
And,
I didn't mind having like the subtitles for the Japanese version at the bottom instead of what the English was saying because I could already hear that.
the third form that they appear in is heavily stylized and is reference to a particular mangaka. I wish I could remember the name of, but it's very cartoony. It's very like 2D. It only appears like when they're at their most like heightened emotionality, or they're just been knocked out in a very cartoony
Yeah.
fashion. It's
Yeah.
very. It only makes brief glancing appearances, but it's still there to add to the same general effect.
Yeah. It's also the in-between state that they are in at the beginning when they're trying to learn how to do the second one you mentioned, where it's really anamorphized. So it's like an in-between one that they go through. The third one is the cartoony one,
Yeah, yeah.
which was just adorable. I like that.
It's great.
It was a little like disorienting at the beginning to see the sudden changes without understanding what was going on. So like I'm watching this movie and the first time they transform it's when there's a war between two different factions inside the forest. A war between the Tanukis. And they're regular animals and then they do the cartoony form and then they turn into the really anthropomorphized form. And I thought, oh, okay, so we're just going to be following around, like, basic real-life animals, like the meerkat family on, like, what was it, Animal Planet, and occasionally they'll animate them to look like people, like they're warring like people. And then, like, no, that's actually what they're going to be in for most of the movie. And these are actually their thoughts and feelings and what they're doing. It's not just, like... It's not just a metaphor. It's supposed to be taken seriously.
This is not a Milo and Otis. That's sort of the thing. It does that, doesn't it? It looks like, is this a metaphor or is this for real? And the movie's like, yes, it is. Because this is animation and these are shapeshifters. So, of course, it's going to be everything at once. Because that's how it works. Because these are shapeshifters and this is the medium we're using to tell the story.
But
Which is really cool.
But going in with no idea about it because, as always, he sends me in completely blind about this shit. I was kind of, like, confused by the different, like, shapes, and I thought it was a transition from, like, what was supposed to be the literal world to the metaphorical world. But no, it's just constantly like that at all times. And the longer you watch it, the more you get used to it, and you're able to, like, predict when it's going to be shifting. And, like, I really feel like the cartoony form was also the help save on some of the animation budget sometimes. Because sometimes background characters are just in that form, even though, like, nothing happened to them.
I mean, that's probably fair. It probably keeps the crowd groups, just saves you a few extra thousand, yen.
Yeah, and, like, that's a smart move. That is a smart way of using something you set up to actually have, like, real-world point. That was really smart of them. I really thought that was, I thought that was a good move, which not everything in this movie was a good move, but I thought that was something I could respect.
So now that you've gotten one compliment out of the way, let's move to the next stage of the sandwich here.
The movie overall is a good movie. It has a good message. The animation's really well done. There's a few things that are just, no, let's not. Can we not? And one of those, hugely, is the way they treat women in the movie. And I know I'm getting straight into feminism and the portrayal of women in the media we watch, which always goes down a great path. But like,
It's fine.
So the
I'm gonna put up a content warning here.
So the first, okay, a content warning, heads up. We will be talking about attempted sexual assault, just real quick, but not right away. Right off the bat, the first woman you're introduced in this whole series is Oroku, or Oroko. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it.
Oroku.
I'm bad. Oroku. Okay, cool. Point of the matter is, you get introduced to her, and she stops the war between the red faction and the blue faction, which, of course, my lizard brain went red versus blue. But, point of the matter is, she gets them between the factions. She's got her little drum. She's getting them to stop and to actually listen to her and pointing out, hey, doesn't matter how often you guys fight, because even if one wins here, everyone's gonna lose later, because the humans are the real enemies. And I was like, yes, yes, get them to stop. Put them in their places. Fucking bring the logic. Thank you. If the humans are the enemies, let's see them fight the humans. And then she gets to do that. And she's like the master transformer in the group, her and this really older Tanuki. And they teach all the young ones how to transform, because the youngest generation is the only generation that cares about taking the time to learn, because apparently everyone who doesn't already have the ability and is older than their youngest generation is too lazy to care to learn it. Because it's a difficult task to learn, and why would they want to learn a skill that will help them survive?
I feel like you're reading something in between here. I feel like you need to hold up a little flag for whenever Taylor slips from like actual text to her own headcanon that she's forgotten is headcanon.
I'm not. That's not headcanon. That's not headcanon. In the very beginning of the movie, she literally says they have to train their youngest generation because the middle generation in between hers and the youngest is too lazy to learn the ability. I'm not bullshitting. That's in the context. Wow.
Brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, because apparently the oldest generation is one from tradition who's used the ability in the past to earn, like, rewards and was the one hunted down and had to learn how to keep it secret. The middle generation got to be healthy and happy and grow fat and lazy when they didn't need that ability and could just, like, scavenge in the woods and sometimes go to humans' homes. But the youngest generation is the one that's facing the destruction of the forest. So, they're the ones that have to relearn the ability to transform that their parents are too lazy to try and learn. That's literally in the context of the movie. I'm not going to the headcanon mode yet. Okay? Okay?
We'll get there.
Give me some credit.
That is fair. You're absolutely fair.
Which, honestly, that mirrors, like, how human generations work. You have, like, the bravest generation, the ones that fought in World War II, and then you have the generation right after that got to reap the benefits. Then you have the generation right after that, which is considered the laziest generation, even though they're the one facing, like, a lot of the most economically difficult time in America when you're looking at it from that direction. It's literally just a representation of how, like, humans also view their generations. Which I just took it as, oh, Oroko is kind of being a bitch. But, I mean, fair enough. She just had to get them all to stop killing each other because they didn't realize who the real enemy is. So fair enough. Let her have some attitude. But then, she lays down the law, and she gets them all to agree to a set of rules. Which is like, don't have kids because you can't focus on kids right now. Learn how to transform. Pass these tests so when you transform, you can, like, go help our people fight against the humans and like, sneak around and figure out more about the humans. And, like, basically her and the elder, like, set down law of the land to help keep all of the Tanukis alive. But only the male ones are trained at the beginning to fight. They all kind of learn how to transform, but the females aren't taught at the very beginning how to transform. They're taught after, like, the males have already learned how to do the ability and have been doing it for a bit. And they're like, well, the females aren't having children, so now they have nothing to do. They have so much extra free time. That's when Oroku's like, oh, we should probably teach them how to transform as well. And that's when they get to learn it. But again, they don't help fight. They're only learning the ability because they have nothing else to do.
I mean, it should be said that does, like, if we're going to talk about how things reflect, you know, our American perspective on things like generations and interactions with the war, you know, women suddenly having free time and that radically shifting, like, what they can do and what they can learn is a real phenomenon. And I thought it was kind of funny to see that explicitly stated as, like, the impetus for this sort of thing in a children's movie. Like, yeah, suddenly when you as a culture have shifted the focus from child rearing to, you know, something like fighting a war, suddenly women are also, yeah, going to have other interests, and all your Tanuki women can now get in on this transforming business. And it's
Yes.
funny, they established like things that the women are just better at in terms of transforming than men. Like men just can't transform into anything other than men, whereas the women can turn into women or also into children. They just, but that never comes up for some reason. They just plant that as a thing they can do, and then it never appears again.
Which you
The only women
think? Which you
we see
think?
women fighting, but only in like the action that like our main like Tanuki Shokuchi arranges, which is specifically an action designed for the Tanukis that can't transform. Because like we've been saying, there it's just some even in the younger generation that can't transform, and we'll get to them. We'll get to those
Yeah.
poor Tanukis.
But my issue with that is when in times of war and you have some shifting like that done, women are seen helping out the war effort. These Tanukis are taught to transform, and the only one we ever see help out the war effort is the one that helps the main character, Okyo, who also goes by Kyo, and is the love interest of the main character. And she turns into a child and helps him scare some of the workers away. And that's it. That's the only
Oh
time we see the
yeah.
women ever help. Even though, historically, when you look at like, and when you can, it's not just like in America this happens too. Also like in Britain and in Japan during World War II, women helped out with the war effort in different ways. This is something that happens constantly everywhere when you have that shift. They show the shift. They introduce this concept of how of the women can transform and how they're better in some transformations than the men. And then they don't get to use it besides one person, one time. That's it. And then they have to fend off the men so they're not sexually assaulted.
Oh yeah, are we finally getting to that foot? We're finally getting to
Yep,
that other
because
foot?
that's literally the order it goes in when they're introducing this. And like I thought it was going to be like, "Oh, they're transforming now. They can help fight." No, they have to fend off the men because the men can't control their urges.
There is a context for this. It's not great, but there is one.
Okay.
Oroku introduces a set of rules and pretexts that they should adopt as part of their ongoing war effort
As I
against
mentioned
the
earlier, they
humans.
couldn't have kids. Yeah.
One of the first among them is that, hey, this shrinking like homeland that we have, the reason that we've been fighting, let's like take that into account moving forward and stop having kids, because more mouths to feed means more starvation, means more likely that we're gonna lose this war. So they're not having kids, and that's why, as we say, the women have more free time. But also, apparently, the impetus is entirely on them to fend off the very, very randy guy tanukis everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's just
The context
guys
doesn't really help
trying
it.
to run after and or tackle the women and then getting body slammed.
Or
Just a sequence of that.
or like our main female character who isn't Oroku, and there's only there's three you get names for, but one of them is Kanta's wife, which isn't a real name. It's identifying her by who her husband is. But you have Oroku, you have Kyo, and then you have Kanta's wife. And Kanta's wife just takes care of Kanta the whole time when he gets injured. Kyo uses was it her dad or her grandfather's death to flirt.
I thought that was funny. I thought that was hilarious.
Uses the death of a family member to flirt with a dude and fish for compliments.
That's hilarious.
It's hilarious, but also like, what the fuck? What the fuck?
She's great. She's just a bit twisted. Is that not great? Like, in the midst of all this terrible female representation, we have this one person that takes it and then twists it just enough that it's like, whoa, you're definitely interesting. Because, like, the scene is just like this, like brief, like, quasi-romantic interlude between Shokichi, our main, like, young generation Tanuki, and Okio, his best friend, girlfriend slash love interest. It evolves. It progresses rapidly.
That would be interesting, and it would work well if it wasn't for three things. Three things that really just fuck you for doing that at all. One, after that, she's shown hanging out with Sojuchi I can't say these fucking
Mm-hmm.
names. She's shown hanging out with the main character. And the main character's talking about how everyone else is stupid because they're trying to have kids and they shouldn't be having kids because that's what Oroku said. And Kyo is the one who breaks that. Despite the fact she is the only female character we see who's not actively getting chased by men and almost assaulted. 2.
Mm-hmm.
She's the only one we see actually do anything to help the war effort, but she doesn't continue helping the war effort. She does one thing and then she doesn't get to do anything. And I wish, if they're gonna like make her kind of different from the other women and using these misogynistic views and putting a twist on them, they should have done more with her in that area. And 3, after she has kids, she's mentioned one other time in the movie at the very end about how, oh, she works as a clerk now, when they pretend to be humans at the end.
I mean, I can't argue. On the net, it's not good for anybody. But I still find this moment fun, bright, and hilarious.
It would be funnier to me if they kept going that way with her.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like they don't keep going that way with her. Otherwise, yeah, it's fucked up, but it is kind of funny, and it's perfectly animated and well placed in the length of the movie. But the rest of the stuff that happens and how she just drops off the face of the planet after she has kids just kind of ruins it.
We should probably explain the joke that we've been talking about for like 4 minutes now at some point. Like, the actual joke is really just like, I mean, they're having an idle chat. She's like, she's introduced trying to fish for a compliment very explicitly in a way that only a man writing a woman, you know, the sort of man that has never met a woman writes a woman fishing for compliments. Like, Shokichi enters the scene, and there's Kyo just posing randomly with a flower on a rock. And he's like, hey, what are you doing? Is your neck all right? And she's like, I was trying to get you to say I looked pretty. You know, a thing that happens. They proceed to have some idle conversation, talk about children's rhymes, bounce a ball back and forth. She brings up they bring up like one particular Tanuki song about a hunter going out, grabbing one, skinning him up, and grilling it.
Yeah.
And she pauses in the middle of the night. You know, my grandfather was killed by a hunter.
And smiles.
And then she smiles, and then she says, the hunter sold his pelt for a lot of money. And then Shokichi reads the situation this time, and he's like, I think your pelt looks really pretty.
It would probably go for a lot,
Which
too.
is... There we go. It's great. Is that not hilarious?
Again, it's funny.
Is that not
but if
just
you're going to introduce that humor...
great and twisted?
If you're going to introduce that kind of humor early on, use it all the way throughout. Else it just looks like she's kind of fucked up.
I mean, like, I'll take it, man.
That's...
Sometimes a mistake is one of the best choices you make.
Yeah, though. Also, just... It's inherently awful when you have your women having to be the protectors of their virginity, but also, like, just protectors of, oh, yes, if men assault me, it's because I wasn't strong enough to protect them. That's bullshit. It's wrong. It's bad. Even in an old movie like this, it's always bad. It's always wrong. But yeah, women don't have a great role. But you want to know who does have a great role?
Tell us who does have a great role. Please do.
Fucking Mr. Krabs.
Gonta. Everybody's favorite Clancy Brown plays Gonta, the militaristic Tanuki, in this beautiful, beautiful movie.
Great movie.
Oh, man.
I did enjoy the movie. I just don't enjoy the women in the movie. Gonta is hilarious. Because you can tell right away what kind of character Gonta is. You can tell right away what's going to happen.
There's only
to
one
him.
character.
You can no, that's not true. Clancy Brown does play other kinds of characters. You've never seen Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go. You don't get to say shit. But Gonta is awesome, and if you take him at face value for the kind of character he is, he's very enjoyable and funny to watch. And, like, There's one point where the other Tanukis do not agree with his plan to attack and murder all humans. They're like, nah, this doesn't sound like a good idea. It sounds like a lot of us would die, and that's a lot of work, so let's not do that. Because again, a running theme is Tanukis are lazy. So, Ganta tries to pull a Q. And he's just like, stick him up. And he transformed his hand into a gun, but I don't know how that would work since I don't think he transformed anything into bullets for the gun. But he has all his buddies come in and, like, surround everybody else to try and take over the Tanuki meeting. And Oroku's just like, sit down, this is pointless, you're not gonna help anybody with any of this. And I think she smacks him upside the head, and then he sits back down. Either that or, like, Sojoki or someone else points out how his plan is clearly stupid and won't work, and here's a better one. And everyone, even his men, agree on that plan, and then he sits down. It was one of those two, and I can't remember which, but both.
I think like,
there's multiple instances of this kind of stuff happening, so...
I think the big coup is the one where they kind of... I don't know if this is like the exact same, but they've already sort of established that they don't want to get rid of all the humans because they just love human like leftovers so much.
Tamura.
And in the middle of this coup, everybody just starts getting distracted. Like, just I think somebody either intentionally or accidentally like brings up, oh, man, you know, I could go for some lunch right now. What do you think? Maybe some fish? Maybe some, like, tempura like, tempura chicken? Nah, yeah, tempura chicken. No. And they just start arguing about what they prefer in chicken. And then Gunta just gets so distracted by the argument, he just goes into full, like, cartoon mode and rants about, no, obviously tempura is superior. And then Oroku's like, see, you idiots. You can't stage a coup because we're all just so essentially... like lazy and food obsessed.
We need the humans.
It's just not gonna work. This is why we're not doing too well. It's just like, it's kind of like it's one of those, like, it's funny, but also like in the back is like, oh, it's kind of quietly sad. This is why we're losing the war. It's just some like part of what we are.
But it's hilarious.
Woof.
That's one of my favorite moments in the entire movie. And Ganta is perfect besides, you know, the fascism he tries to pull. There's a lot of fascism from Ganta.
I mean, you know, he loves the military. He wants to do a bit of an annihilation of the human race. And can you blame him, given his circumstance?
No, okay, so that's the thing. Given the circumstances, I totally understand why he would want to rise up and kill all the humans, because they're destroying all of his land and all of his community. And they've destroyed his hometown and killed all of his family. His wife and him, and then a few other people from that area are the only ones that are left. It makes sense, but I can't take him seriously. And I love that it makes sense, but I don't have to take him seriously. Because all of this is at face value. Because all of this is just at face value, and they're like, yeah, these are a bunch of serious subjects, but they're going to be approached in a goofy way, where you get them, but you can also laugh at them despite the serious subjects.
I think that's really we'll get to it more, I'm sure, but that is I think if I had to put into words the core of why I like this movie, is just that, like, it's got all these big, serious ideas, but it's also going to laugh at them, and I think that's sort of the core of any good existentialist text, is you know, let's do the Sartre thing, let's be absurd, let's just embrace it. No, that's Camus. Let's be Camus about it. We're going to laugh at the absurdity of it all. It's very in line with Camus, this movie. It's very Sisyphus ought to be happy when we get to the end of it. And we'll get there. Anyway, Gunta is great. We do stand Gunta. We stand Gunta's wife.
I don't stand him or her, but I do like them. I don't stand them, though.
I mean, good for, you know, man, they're excellent. They're excellently loud militarist. Well, he is. She's just sort of
She's just there to make
trying
him
to
feel
take
better.
care of him, put him back together when he breaks into 1,000 tiny pieces.
She's like, no, don't do this, you'll get hurt. And he's like, I'm gonna do it anyways. And then she has to nurse him back to health, because that's her job as the wife.
It's great. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Listen, there is only one character.
I mean, it's better than where things end up for her.
Yeah. There is only one character in this movie I will stand, and I cannot remember his name.
Shokichi.
The best friend. No, not the main character. He's
No,
a
the
little
best
dickhead.
friend.
The best
Oh yeah,
friend.
Ponchi.
Because
Ponchi. Ponchi.
Punchy cannot
Ponchi's nice.
transform like everybody else. He gets trained to, and he can kind of do it a little bit, but he's not as good at it as the other Tanukis. And he just wants to be a Tanuki. He doesn't want to live with humans. He doesn't want to fight humans. He just wants to live in what's left of the forest and continue living his life. And you know what? I respect that. Because unlike like Sochiti and Ganta, who are fighting the civil war as well as this outside war where they're constantly vying for power and trying to figure out what's going to happen, he just wants to gather food for the winter. Because the winters are hard and there's not a lot of food for them. And there's moments where he just disappears to the background of this movie. And I constantly looked for him, but there's a long period of time where he's just not mentioned at all. And I thought the whole movie, because originally him and Sochiti are on different sides of the war at the very beginning. They're the two children in different colors, play fighting alongside the adults. Because this movie starts off with them as children. But then he disappears, and I just wanted more. I wanted more of a conflict between him and Sochi arguing about like what's the better way, living as Tanukis or trying to defeat the humans. What will work best? But you don't get that, and it made me sad because I wanted more of him and his viewpoints because he's the only one who's like not completely on board with fighting all the humans. Besides, you know, the Buddhist cult that appears later. The dancing Buddhist cult, where they all kill themselves.
Yeah.
They're the only two. Those are the only two
any
factions.
good movie, it needs a dancing Buddhist cult in the middle.
Yeah, the dancing Buddhist cult in the middle of the movie. Yeah, so you have them, you have the Tanukis who just want to be Tanukis but don't have the option because everyone has to work together to fight the humans. And then you have the ones that are fighting the humans. Those are your three factions. Only one matters. That is the wrong finger to continue holding up. That is the order I went in. And that's just it. I wanted more. I wanted more from like, let's just live as raccoons.
They really don't. They only
Tanukis,
kind
not
of bring up
raccoons.
that
Fuck.
conflict at the end there.
Yeah.
Just this sort of that there is this population of Tanukis that can't change, that have not been able to come into the war effort, and like we get the sense, like I said earlier, Shokichi does arrange like an action that they can all take a part in that doesn't require transformation. They huck some sort of bit of industrial equipment just over a hill.
Yeah.
And then they just chant a song at the workers, and then they walk off.
Yeah.
It's great. It's fabulous, and it reiterates this sense that Shokichi is kind of in touch with he's got thumbs in a lot of pies here. He's clearly trying to keep an ear to the ground in a lot of respects.
Yeah.
He's also kind of, as a consequence, one supposes, of his relation with Ponchi, that he like realizes, hey, there are these Tanukis here that are a part of our group, and they want to be a part of this, and they want to have their own lives too. They deserve to have like this voice and capacity. And like we see at the end that he's still trying to stay in touch with them as much as he can in between, everything else that he has to do.
So the reason why I thought his childhood best friend was going to be playing a bigger part is because he's actually brought up at the very beginning of the movie. Not only are they the two children that are fighting on opposite sides at the beginning who like go through training together, but in the middle of training, Sochiki points out how he never considered how his friend may just want to live as a Tanuki for the rest of his life and just live a simple life. He points that out because he's narrating the story from the future and this all happened in the past. But that's brought up at the very beginning of the movie, right before all the training and all the fun stuff starts happening, and it's forgotten about until nearly the end. And that's just, I just wanted more from that plot. It was a really good plot. I really wanted that conflict to be like part of the central issue. But I know humans are the bad guys. We have to focus more on them. They did try and tell a lot in this short movie, though. With the Kitsune
yeah,
too,
it's dense.
They tried to shove a lot in there.
They're a stack of threads, and like we said, that's a consequence of just like the form, I think, because it's doing this war documentary like style, and it is trying to outline the course of several years of like time of like different actions and different like individuals that are going off on their own missions and different like attack strategies that they formulate and how those pan out and what the humans are doing, and it's all a lot to manage on top of like broader idealistic conflicts that they try every now and again, and also the occasional actual like character arc or romance that they want to insert there. It's a real potpourri, a lot of this movie. It is just like bouncing everywhere. I'm not
It
sure if
really
this fits in
is.
even like a 5 act structure.
And that kind of works because when you're discussing a war, lots of stuff is going on. They're always going to be constantly going on. It makes sense that you would have a lot to cover in the movie. But if that's what you're going to do, then you either need to cut out a lot of the smaller moments that just are them just sitting around doing nothing, not even really talking about the war, but just chilling in fields, or you need to cut how much you're showing in this one movie and just focus on a few less strings. But for what it is, there's a lot going on in it, but it's all really simple to follow what's happening in there. As long as like you're not forgetting stuff that was casually mentioned at the beginning, you're able to follow along with, oh, all of this is still happening in the background pretty well. That is something that this movie does really well, is like, hey, don't forget, this was a thing. Remember, we're not going to throw it in your face, but this was happening.
Don't forget, those guys that went off on a mission 2 years ago and we haven't heard from them? They're still out there. We're still waiting for them.
Yep. Yep.
Those foxes we mentioned that can change earlier, they're a thing. Don't forget that they're a thing. Oh, look, there's one. Wonder if that'll be important.
Oh, look, remember that children's book we found from the humans talking about, like, what tanukis can do and how they would attack people? That specific move that's drawn on the page right there, Ganta's like, staring at intently? Yeah, he'll be using that 5 seconds from now, but also at the climax of the movie, in his final stand.
There's like an editing, visual storytelling, just general storytelling rule that like I'm betting Taylor is like also familiar with, and I'm just for the audience in general. The idea of planting and payoff.
Yes.
It's sort of a 3-step process. When you're trying to establish an idea that is not going to be like the central focus of a story, that's not going to be constantly talked about. If you want to like convey information to a reader or a viewer of some sort, you're going to start off by planting the idea, like initially introducing this in some capacity, either visually or having characters point it out. And, the assumption is that later on, this information is going to pay off. It's going to come into the story in an interesting way. It's going to solve a problem or introduce a new one in some way, or just be a recurring motif. The assumption is somewhere between the payoff and the planting, there's going to be a bit of a reminder. Counter to the name, it's a 3-step process. And I think that the issue that a lot of this movie's threads suffer from, or especially the longer ones, with the shorter ones they can kind of get away with this, but with the movie length ones, it'll have the planting, it'll have the payoff, but sometimes it forgets the reminder. Like with the quest to get the transformation masters, like there's a lot of like reminder because everybody's just constantly waiting for that news because so much of the war effort hinges on that news. But when it comes to like the broader ideological issue of, hey, this population of Tanukis that just wants things to remain the same, that don't want a radical shift in either direction, they're here and they have like a voice that deserves hearing. That only gets a planting and a payoff. There's no reminder for that one,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate because I also feel that it's kind of core to the most interesting parts of this movie conceptually. And it is really a pity that it doesn't get more focus. It's a disappointing part.
I completely agree. I think that was supposed to be a big core of the movie. Like, it feels like that was supposed to matter more. And I'm sad. I'm sad about the lack of it. Okay? I was so excited about that. So sad about the lack of it.
I mean, it gets like a special highlighting, and it's sort of the poignant like turning point of the like end of the movie. That's sort of what we end on, is an analysis of how things turn out for the Tanuki population that isn't transforming. So clearly they do also respect the significance of that. It's just that they didn't have room for it, evidently, or they didn't feel like it was necessary to bring it up in the interim.
Yeah. One of the most visually like pleasing scenes to watch in this whole movie is the ghost parade.
Oh
So, some
yeah.
context. It like near the end of the second half of the movie, beginning of the third act. Um shut up. Anyways, that fucking expression. Anyways, the Tanuki put on a parade of sorts, and they think it's going to terrify the humans because the masters from the other islands have been, well, the masters from one of the other islands and missions have come back, and they're like, this is how we get our humans in line. This is how you can control your humans too. Which makes me just think, oh, is that how they treat their women as well? But moving on. Um, So they decide to put on a parade where they're going to pretend to be all these other spirits from Japanese folklore and scare the shit out of the humans. And you think, oh, this is actually going to work really well. It's going to be so cool. And it looks amazing. And visually, I think it's the best part of the movie. Besides the very end, where as one last ditch effort, they bring back their forest metaphorically.
Oh yeah.
This parade is so great, and there's like so many like monsters you could pick out in it that just I love them. I love seeing them in movies. A lot of them like show up in other like movies that are inspired by Japanese folklore as well, like Kubo and other things too. But the humans also really enjoy the parade. They think it's a show because they're so desensitized to these legends that they believe are fantasy, because they already see them a lot in like fairy tale books that aren't real, or like movies where they aren't actually happening. So the only people who actually get scared are small children and then drunks. And that's it. Everyone's else like, this is such a great parade. You guys are doing so good. And I'm like, yes, you know what? This makes sense. Of course they're not going to be afraid. They think it's fake. They don't believe in this shit anymore. They're enjoying it like I'm enjoying it. Yes. And it's so great. It's so great. I love that part of the movie. It's absolutely brilliant. It's so gorgeous. It's so good.
It is just visually spectacular, and there's so much that they're
Yes.
drawing from to build this like just absolute spectacle of Japanese folklore. And like you're saying, the humans have just the most realistic reaction, which is like, "Huh, what's that going on?" Or like two drunks just having like a 5-minute conversation where they don't even notice that it's happening, and they talk about how kids are like, will see stuff because they believe that that's real. And like then they start to kick it up a notch, and they'll like flood a couple of blocks or like send monsters into people's houses. And it starts to become stuff that the people can't readily explain, so that, even though they're not like terrified and running screaming, there's still like this ambient sense of, maybe there was something up there. I can't explain it.
Yeah.
But even there, it's just people kind of like, wonder what that was. And then they move on with their lives, which I feel is like there are one or two reactions I have to assume people would have if exposed to supernatural entities that they couldn't otherwise explain. Either would be running screaming, or it would be, huh,
That was cool.
it's interesting. And then it just the turning point that like deflates the whole spectacular parade is, of course, capitalism.
Capitalism
Like
strikes again. It ruins even this wonderful fucking parade in the middle of the movie.
The morning after, when everyone's talking like, who did this parade? Why is there no video evidence? Everything there, it's so hard to figure out what happened. And then like an amusement park that's opening up nearby like puts its CEO in front of the camera, and he's like, it was us. We did
We
it.
did it.
It was a publicity stunt. That was all us. And it just breaks the Tanuki's hearts. Like all of our like the whole army is just like brokenhearted. They thought that they'd stop the production, and it just ruins them.
it's a whole mood, because like the morning after a really fun night is always like kind of shitty, but this is extremely shitty, where like they hear on the news the night before how production has been, well, not the night before, they hear on the news at first how production's gonna stop until they can figure everything out. And then the head of the company comes out and claims responsibility, and he literally says, I'm sorry I didn't get the proper authorization for this, but I'm sure that the money we'll make from the increase of sales, since you all enjoyed it so much, will more than make up for the fines I'm going to pay, because it was all about bringing you all joy. And like, you can see him actively doing the number crunching in his head as he's definitely making sure, oh, this is gonna work in my favor. And the army's like, how dare he take credit for what we did? We should be getting the glory. We're the ones who did it. Despite the fact that they literally agreed earlier how they can't let the humans know they exist, or else they'll all be hunted down. But they don't want the fucking capitalism to get the credit for it.
It's so intense when it gets to just this end. They're really struggling to figure out what lines they won't cross at the end.
Yeah.
Because it all goes to heck after that.
It really does.
Buddhist dancing cults.
Okay, so there are 3 masters from one of the islands that come here. One of them dies in the middle of the act, or dies at the end of it. They start ending the parade as they see he's dying. The oldest one is 999 years old, and right before he can reach 1,000, he decides he's lived on the world long enough. He takes his balls and transforms them into a fucking ship, and then sails away with his dancing Buddhist cult. After 999 years, he finally went senile. And that's exactly what the movie says as he starts this cult. As he sings a song about it being a cult.
It's great. It's hilarious.
So great. Honestly, I love that. I loved it. It was so funny. And they're literally like, they used their transformation skills. And some of the Tanuki who couldn't transform went along with. But all the food, they made from transforming it. And they had no idea the further they got away from the mainland, the sooner they would run out of things to eat or drink, because they didn't pack any real food. It was all stuff they transformed. Oh my god!
They're just the very like loud implication is they're all sailing to their deaths. There's no salvation to be found here. You joined a death cult.
You joined a death cult. He called it a cult. Why the fuck did you go?
And they also explicit, like you said, we were asking for a planting a reminder moment for the threat of, hey, Tanukis can't all transform. This is kind of the closest we get to a reminder, where a significant chunk of the can't transform population is like, hey, if my choices are annihilated by humans, dancing cult,
I'm gonna go with a dancing cult.
That dancing cult.
That dancing cult's looking like a good idea right now.
It's looking like a good idea. Hage can really play the tiny little cymbal.
Yep. And again, I'm not just throwing the word cult around just to throw it around. That's literally what they call it in the movie. That's what the group is called.
They have a song and everything.
It's so great. He's literally pounding the drum in the middle of this like small outdoor building that they're all trapped in. Like, why don't you come and join my dancing cult? It is so good. It's so good. I loved it. So you have one master left. I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just gonna say, and at the same time, that just sort of marks
sad.
Like. After the parade fails, after we lose 2 masters, and with this this scene of the boat leaving and some of the ones that were a part of the cult that transformed into like one last yokai bouncing around, and then like the scene ends with them getting rammed by a Mack truck that just goes through the big yokai that they've turned into, and they go from being this like head with a hole in it to being a mound of actual raccoon dogs that have been hit by a truck and folding in onto a bloody, pulpy mess. And that's sort of the big tonal shift to hopelessness for the rest of the movie. Just to
clarify, the ship did not get hit by a truck. Ganta leads a last-ditch effort, turning him and some of his friends into a yokai to run around the city streets, and they get hit by a truck.
It's not Gonta. Gonta goes out in another bloodbath. There's a plurality of bloodbaths here. Gunta, you remember? He goes to try and stage an actual assault against some
yes.
The woodsman.
But he does the yokai as well. He's part of both groups. Because he survives the fight with the woodsman, and then he turns into a yokai, and the yokai is his final stand, and that is when he dies on the road.
I must have that confused. Oh, well, either way, Gunta goes out.
Yeah, Gunta goes out.
No, I know, because he leads the assault. That's where they have the inflating testicles when they reveal themselves, and they go man-to-man against the riot police that show up.
Yes,
and then
but that happens.
We don't see it, but they cut away and he dies. He's dead.
That happens
He's not
before
with the dancing
yokai.
cult.
That happens before the yokai. The yokai happens later. Because that's Ganta's last
Does the dancing
thing.
cult not happen before the woodsman assault?
I don't
Maybe
think so.
I have the order of operations with it. I just don't think that Gunta... Because no, wait.
I really think
I don't know.
he
There's
is.
There are two bloodbaths, and then I just remember that the last scene we have is where they reveal themselves to the reporters, and Gunta's wife is there, and she's crying because Gunta died. I just don't think Gunta joined the cult. I feel like I'd remember if Gunta joined the cult, because that seemed very out of character for him.
No, because the ship cult is a completely different thing from the yokai running around in the streets.
The giant head running around the streets?
The giant head running around the streets is not part of the ship. It's the people who survived the encounter with the police. They turn into a yokai head after, decide they're going to take out as many humans as they can with them since the cops already destroyed most of their people. They transform into the head, they run around the streets and get run over by a car, and that is when Gonta dies. He gets sliced right in half.
And with
violence.
those bloodbaths, we sort of get that shift to hopelessness.
Yeah, no, it's complete another shift to hopelessness, which is hinted at earlier with the boat, about how the only people who realize they're all going to die on that ship are the people who are watching them leave. And that's it.
It definitely... And that's when, they start pulling out all the stops. Like we said, that's when they contact the reporters, and they, scream at them, hey, we did the parade! It wasn't them! It wasn't, the amusement park people. They've tried to resolve the amusement park thing directly. That
nothing works.
Opened up its own line of threads. Suffice to say, they just start pulling out the stops, and that's when things sort of slowly come to this, yeah, you are gonna lose. We all knew they were gonna lose, but that's when you're like, you're gonna lose and it's gonna hurt.
It's gonna hurt
a lot.
Really bad. That's also when the Kisune gets reintroduced. Because there's one master of transformation left from the other island. And he has one last idea. And it's after he meets with a Kisune who offers him a very, straightforward plan. Hey, use your transformation skills for this company, get paid, pretend to be humans for the rest of your lives, and you can actually live in peace. That's what us Kisune did. That's why some of us are still alive. And he's like, but what about the ones who can't transform? Because that's the only time they matter is when they're all about to die. And they're like, well, if they can't transform, then they have to live as animals for the rest of their lives. They don't get to live with everybody else who's making money. Because capitalism.
Because capitalism.
And if you can't do the job that you're required to in order to make money in a human world, you don't deserve to live, according to the Kisune and the capitalist in this movie. Which makes me think, where have I heard that propaganda before? Probably Fox News.
Huh?
It's so blatant, though. It is blatant. But, so the Kisune reach out to the last master and try to convince everybody, hey, transform for the rest of your lives as humans. And they're like, we don't want to do that. So they pretend to agree to the deal. They steal, the guy who runs the amusement park is coming out to meet them, and they're going to put on a show. And he has brought all the money that he promised them along with him in a fucking suitcase. Like an idiot. And he jumps into this Lucky Cat jar thing they have set up, which is just a bunch of them transforming, goes for the rooms, and then they drop his ass with the Kitsune and the other human with them and take all the money and run. And they're like, we still have to continue this war on the humans, even though we have this money now. And they forget they have the money. And they never use the money for anything until finally, at the end, they realize what they must do. And in one final act, the ones who can transform use their ability to bring back the world as it was when they were children, like 3 years ago now.
In like the 60s, I think it is, actually.
Yeah. No, because it's when they're children, because Sojichi, literally, the past version of him as a child running with his best friend are seen. And his best friend comments on that as he runs out. So it's like...
But it's such a radical transformation. I think it more closely resembles like that early Tanuki world from the 60s. So I think the like implication is, oh, I guess they were around back in the 60s before the like urbanization began.
I guess. Some of them definitely have been because the Tanukis have long lives. But I just assumed it was 3 years ago, back when the construction first started. Because of the, again, you see Sojiki and his best friend as children running around as part of this past vision. It could even be both, considering how there are Tanuki who can transform, who remember a time even further back than that. And it's literally like all of their memories together are helping them transform into this final stage where they're saying goodbye to the forest and what they remember. And they transformed the whole mountainside that has now been industrialized back into the forest that they remember. And there's this moment where this human woman says, "Is that my mother?" And then she goes running down the street towards her mom. And I genuinely cannot tell if that is
Feels pretty obvious to me.
I genuinely cannot tell if one, that is her mother and she just went out before all of this transformation happened and they thought she got lost and they weren't sure if they were going to see her again, or two, if her mother's dead and one of the Tanuki remember seeing the woman and just use their transformation powers to have her walking around too, because you never see her actually reach the older woman. And you just hear the shouting and seeing the running, and we see that some of the trees are like in the middle of houses and like replacing them and whatnot until the vision ends and everything returns to the way it's been industrialized now, and it turns out all the trees and everything was fake. So I have no idea. It
fascinated me that you hooked onto that moment so much, because it really is just like another part of the illusion. I feel it's just like, hey, she's seeing her dead mom. This is just another part of the world that is gone. Here, let's remember how things used to be back before industrialization. Your mom used to be here, live here, just like we used to be children here. You remember this world? And then it goes away because you can't have that world again.
Their 5-year plan for war against humans ends at 3 years, and it's a complete and utter failure. And in 3 years, they went from being children to having families of their own to watching so many people die. And it sucks. And it's sad. But that moment really got to me. And I genuinely cannot tell, because like part of me wants to believe it's the Tanukis are conjuring up this figment of a woman because they remember seeing her. And like it's this great metaphor for what the whole movie's about. Remembering one last time everything you've lost before it's gone forever. But at the same time, why would the Tanuki care that much about one individual woman? What about her would stand out so much that they would actually like transform her image too? And so like I'm really torn because I realize logically the Tanukis probably wouldn't care that much about one individual human. So it's probably an older woman who went out before this all happened, and then they were worried she wasn't going to be able to make it home. Or two, they do care for some reason, and they just want to bring back as much as possible. And that's also reasonable given everything that is a theme in this movie. So I don't know which it is, but I really want to believe it's the latter.
I have to believe that it is just they are like, the focus is on bringing back the world as they remember it, as it was when things were beautiful, and for them, and they are focusing so much that they bring back that world. That's why it's not just, the forests and the farmhouses and the leftovers that they remember. It is, the old-fashioned phone lines and the old buses and the old houses and rice paddies. and the old villagers and people that used to live there. I feel like that's just a whole, all part and parcel of the memory that they're bringing back.
Yeah. And again, that's the more beautiful image, even if it's unlikely they would care that much to actually bring back the humans, because the Tanuki pay more attention to the surroundings than they do humans who they're trying to get rid of. And that could just be because of like the war that's going on or something else, but
I mean, clearly they do pay attention to humans, though. I have to disagree. They do pay a lot of attention. Like, that's like a point of discussion several times that, like, no, we like the humans, we like their food. What sets Shokichi apart at the beginning and what makes him so good at transforming is that he cares about and pays attention to humans. Like, clearly there's some interaction going on there that goes back to the past.
that's fair.
And like they say with like the transformation map, also like back at their own islands have clear memories of like how they've interacted with humans and how they've specifically constructed a certain kind of interaction that they want to have with them. Like they're very cognizant of those things, I think.
Some of them are, and some of them aren't. Um, Sojiki wants to study and learn about the humans. He wants to know as much about the humans as possible so that they can learn how to best defeat them. It's always in context of the war. And later on, he wants to learn about the humans so they can best live among them. But it's never because he actually cares about humans. It's because he cares about being able to, like, use that information to help him out best.
At
Which
the
is
start,
what
they established that it's just sort of recreationally what he does. Like when they're
I
going
don't.
before the war started, they say like, "Hey, the reason that as they started training, Shokuchi had an advantage because he'd always kind of had an interest in humans and what they were doing." And then they cut to him as a kid watching kids play soccer, and then almost getting picked up as a soccer ball.
They said he always had an interest in transformation. They don't say humans. They say transformation. That's why he's the best at transforming.
I don't think that's right, but I'm sure that we'll cut back to a clip of it at some point, and I'll find out I'm wrong.
Well, I could very well be wrong, but I remember them saying that he was the best at transforming in his class because he used the skill the most, because he was the most interested in actually being able to transform. And maybe that was also because he was the most interested in the humans. That is something that's prevalent throughout, but I never took that as he actually cares about humans. I took that as he cares about how he's able to use the knowledge of how humans work to best help him out. But I could be wrong. And again, it's all up for interpretation, so this could just be a differences in interpreting the whole movie. Because the only stuff that's really obvious in the movie is, one, humans are bad and they're destroying nature, which is destroying animals and their ecosystems. That's pretty blatant. That's pretty obvious. You even get like one of those old Captain Planet sign out saying, hey, if you don't do something to stop this, it will be irreversible in the future. Even though like companies cause a lot more of those problems than individuals. But yeah, that's a pretty blatant message in there. I can't think of another really blatant one off the top of my head, but that's definitely like the big one that's really obvious and not really up for interpretation.
I feel like the other kind of big one there that is just sort of more in terms of attitude. They don't go into explicit. Nobody starts citing any actual Camus, but it just in terms of like attitude and how they relate to the world around them. They very are clear about, hey, once we've lost sort of our homeland and everything, when all goes to heck, all we've kind of got left is our own lives and like the little bits of beauty that we've gathered through them, which is why they do this one last transformation. Not because it's going to have any real change, but just because sometimes the only meaningful things in life are the beautiful things that you're carrying with you. And they try to share, hey, this is what made our world beautiful. This is what you've pushed away, people around us. Just see that for a second, and maybe that'll change you. And it kind of gets reiterated again when they say, hey, when the Tanukis that can't transform had to adapt, they didn't. They were like, okay, we're just going to live our lives as happy and full as we can because they're going to be short. And that is just the core of, Camusian absurdism, which is life sucks and it's short, so have a good time because there's nothing else to it.
Carpe diem.
And that is just the core of it, really, for them. I feel like that's the other essential. And that's why I like it so much. it gets to that sort of sense that like, hey, life sucks and it's kind of, the world just kind of gets bad and it's just sort of ambiently unpleasant. So you have to find the pleasant moments in between the war documentary that is your life. We're running fast here. I should have pulled up this warning earlier, but we're getting a bit short on time. What are any last big vines that you want to jump off into before we get to reviewing the movie as a whole?
I know you did a lot of research for this movie, and I'm not sure we've touched on anything you did research for. So why don't we go on one of yours?
Okay. This movie is really interesting to me on a lot of levels. I've talked about like the philosophy of it. I've talked about like just the like gimmicky sort of like genre form that they've picked to tell a story in. I like a lot of the sense of humor. Like there's a lot in it that I like. There's also parts of it that I acknowledge that I just can't really access because this movie is more so than I think most Ghibli films, certainly most of the fantasy ones that I've seen, super rooted in Japanese culture specifically. This isn't like, a My Neighbor Totoro situation where they explicitly tried to find and make something new that wasn't based on old folklore. This isn't like Mononoke or Earthsea where they're basing it either literally or broadly in like Western fantasy, or like Nausicaa, which is also literally Western fantasy that they're adapting. This is Japanese folklore, hardcore. Like the three transformation masters, they didn't make them up for the movie. Those are actual real world like tanukis and folklore that have their own associated tales and legends and things that they've done.
I was not aware of that.
They're naming the new Tama Hills development zone. That's a real town that you can go to that was built during this time period. It's all, so it's not just the folklore that's real. Like, yeah, they're referencing real yokai and the story that they recreate between Shokichi and the girl that flirts by mentioning her dead grandpa. They're basing that on like a story that was written. They like credit the actual author of that like story. They're singing folk songs in the original Japanese. They're real folk songs about tanukis that they obviously don't translate accurately to English because they're about tanukis and they don't want to mention that they have scrotums. The English dub is super bowdlerized. Just a heads up, if you couldn't already guess. For some reason, Disney doesn't want to release a film where they're constantly talking about scrotums. Cowards.
They refer to them as rugs the entire time, which is really...
I think the raccoon pouches, I think, is the key word, because I guess raccoons are marsupials now. And also raccoons. Raccoon dogs are called dogs for a reason. They're canids. Anyway, suffice to say, there's a whole chunk of this movie that as a Western viewer, we can't access. We don't have really direct access to the context, to the literary, cultural, folklorish context to sort of interpret a lot of stuff that's being hurled at us, or the historical, social context to understand the actual real world setting that it's all put into, or the broader, I think, what's a good word for this? Nationalistic context. This movie is fueled by nostalgia in a lot of senses. And it's nostalgia that has a universal element, that yearning for a beautiful rural sort of past, which does throw up some red flags, but also I think is not an inherent, is not an idea without good elements, even if it is on the whole kind of a bit scary, this nostalgia for an idealized past. The idea of looking back to a time before, the capitalistic forces made the world go bad, back to the time of your childhood when life felt simpler, that's not an inherently negative feeling, I think, to have or to celebrate in some respects. The beauty of the world as you've sort of seen it and as you remember it with a little bit of rose tinting. I would say that the danger when looking through a rose-tinted nostalgia lens is when you forget about all the bad stuff you weren't seeing. And you try and say there was no bad at all. It's when you forget the tinting. That's when things get dangerous. And that's sort of what brings me around to, I guess, how to put this. Like I said, we're not in this context. But suffice it to say, this does come from a real world, from a real country that does, it is representing an actual very specific country's nostalgia. This is representing this sort of nationalistic nostalgia for a sort of pre-World War II kind of period of time. Uh, it connects to a lot of ideas, and there's only so much research you can do for this, and I'm certainly not going to speak from the perspective from like a whole perspective about like the significance of that context and nostalgia for it. Suffice it to say, it does like this movie connects to a lot of broader ideas, including I don't know, the idea of Satoyama, which is this a complex idea that describes not only like a specific kind of natural environment, but also like this idea of Japanese rural like traditional interactions with environment and nature, and the idea that the Japanese have historically been like better connected at nature, have like been really at peace and in balance with nature. It's a complicated idea with a lot of complicated like give and take that has to be given when you like approach and discuss it. It's become kind of a part of modern environmentalist discussions, the idea of like a Satoyama style approach to nature. Suffice it to say, this movie and some other Ghibli films have that same sort of nostalgia for this kind of idealized version of Japanese interaction with nature that is neither wholly devoid of fact or wholly accurate in terms of its nostalgia, because it's complicated, because the real world is complicated.
And you can't incorporate all of that into an animated movie that's only like what, an hour and a half long, an hour and 15.
It has that nostalgia, and it's a complicated idea, and I can't really answer what the meaning of that nostalgia is. I can tell you that there's a mix of readings on this film and how it feels about like the transition period between like traditional Japan and modern Japan, because that's really the core of this movie, is this transition period. Some people read it in the same way that I kind of do, which is like a naked nostalgia that feels like the past was better. Other people, like Ursula K. Hayes in Plasmatic Nature, Environmentalism, and Animated Films, takes a different read to it and sort of interprets in the way that the Tanukis mentioned. We were supposed to be able to be the ones that could transform, not you humans. Like like one last cry that they have when they're losing. Like the humans are changing the world in the way that we thought we were the only ones capable of doing. And Hayes says maybe like with this like implementation of this idea that humans are shapeshifters as well, and of course also with the idea that amusement parks and entertainment media can take over the same imagination space that used to be filled by, Buddhism and Shinto and other temples, the way that the amusement park just takes credit for the entire explicitly, clearly magical parade. Maybe the reality of what the movie is pushing is this notion that maybe the past and now both have this same level of kind of like transformed inauthenticity. Maybe just like the Tanukis at the end, humans are also transforming to look like workers, and we're also getting exhausted as we try to fake being humans throughout the day. Maybe there's just a certain level of unreality to the world, both old and new, that has this sort of, there's a continuity there perhaps that we just don't appreciate. And maybe that's what this movie reveals with its focus on transformation as a theme.
I would say it's pretty obvious that between you and I, we lean pretty heavily into the opposite one of those articles you just pulled up. But I don't think either, and I haven't read them, I will after this, but who's to say either one is wrong in their interpretations? Again, it's just how you view the movie. There's probably things that have been misunderstood or are inaccurately described in those articles you mentioned, but altogether, who's to say their ideas are incorrect at all? If it's all up into interpretation, there are probably things that are correct and points that each one brings up that the other one might have forgotten about that are completely accurate. It all depends on how are you, the individual, going to approach this movie. And I think that ties in pretty well to our outro for this. Like, me as an individual, I would recommend this movie. I would not suggest extremely young people to watch it. If you don't want to have a conversation about genitalia with your children yet, don't let them watch it. Everyone else, though, yeah, they would love it, though. It's hilarious. It's a really good, like, children's movie before you realize the quiet horror happening in the background of everything, which is, like, all children's movies. As you grow up and realize the quiet horror of what's happening in the background of them.
The good stuff has this quiet existentialist horror. All the good stuff.
All the good stuff.
You want your kids to turn out to be bad YouTube video essayists? Show them stuff like this.
God damn it. Point of the matter is, I would recommend this movie for other people. There is some gore. The representation of women isn't great, but like it's also not the worst thing I've ever seen. I'm kind of happy they forget about their female characters. That way they couldn't make them worse in a way. But overall,
Sometimes
I would
real
recommend
representation is better than bad representation.
it. Sometimes depends. It really depends. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was funny. There were some moments that made me sit in quiet horror as I watched, but a lot of things that made me question what the fuck is happening. But overall, it was really good, and I'm glad you introduced me to this, and I'm happy I was finally able to catch this movie.
Well, I guess on that note, I've been Noah.
And I've been Taylor.
And you finally caught Pom Poko.
I finally caught the fucking Tanuki movie. Which I had no idea was a Ghibli movie that existed until this year. So that's something.
That was a good win. Y'all have a good evening. See you around.
Thank you for watching the video. If you liked our discussions on Pom Poko, please subscribe to support our channel. Likes are wonderful too and greatly appreciated. If you want to see these episodes get made before they go up on YouTube and Spotify, you can find the links to our Twitch channels in the description below. We record the episodes on both channels at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday nights. So, have you guys seen the movie Pom Poko? And if so, what were your thoughts on it?